Are we ready? Dear ladies and gentlemen, good evening and a very warm welcome. I'm very happy to have you here with me or with us here at the premises of the Diplomatic Academy in person. But also we have listeners tuning in, streaming in via YouTube and via Facebook. So also very welcome to everybody around the world being with us this evening to attend this year's public lecture by Jean-Emmanuel Pondi. So a quick introduction of myself. So I'm Katja Kalkschmied. You see 50% of the in-house economists. It's me, and it's Martin Feldkircher. And for me, it's an honor to introduce Jean-Emmanuel Pondi and to moderate this year's discussion of the public lecture that will follow the presentation that we will hear. So Professor Pondi is a very familiar and very welcome face at the Diplomatic Academy. He is with us, he's giving lectures, he's giving public lectures, he's teaching since 2004. So last year we were celebrating his long-term relationship with the Diplomatic Academy, and I was asked by our Dean, Markus Kornprops, to say a very loud thank you, and we are very happy to have you with us and to keep you with us for the future too. So Professor Pondi is teaching at Diplomatic Academy students on topics of conflict resolution in Africa and dynamics of African integration, which will probably feed into this year's lecture at one point or the other two. So Jean-Emmanuel Pondi himself was having his bachelor's studies made in Lyon. He had a Master of Science in Political Economy from the London School of Economics. He had another Master's of Philosophy in International Relations at the Cambridge University. And he obtained the PhD in the United States at the State University of Pennsylvania. He was then moving back to his home country, Cameroon, where he began his career at the Institute of International Relations of Cameroon at the University of Yaoundé. And he stayed there. He moved up to become head of the department. He got the general secretary. He got the director of the institute. And presently, he's the vice director of the University of Yaoundé. So today, Professor Pondi is a very distinguished scholar in the fields of political science and international relations, especially African international relations. He's author or editor of 22 books and 70 scientific articles that were published in internationally renowned journals. Last year, a book was published not by Professor Pondi, but about Professor Pondi from fellow colleagues and also from former students of him who reflect on his personal career and the influence of his research. So I have to say the title of the book in English, since I never managed French, unfortunately. So it's Rethinking International Relations from an African Perspective. So that's the soft copy version that you can obtain. It's a large book. It's about 450 pages and costs only 750 pages. Now that makes my calculation even more different, because I wanted to say, which is not much price per page as an economist would always calculate. So going from 400 to 700 makes it exceptionally cheap. But book lovers don't look at that. So there's also a hard copy for the book lovers on you to have a good book in a shelf for a little bit of more money, but more than worth it. Good. So now I'm close to handing it over to you, Professor Pondi. A warm welcome to you. I'm very happy to have you here and giving this year's public lecture on the title, Understanding the Transformation of Africa in the 21st Century and Beyond. I'm very much looking forward to it. And before I hand over a short note on the discussion round, so I will take questions from the audience. I'm happy to see you. You raise your hand, and you will be handed over the microphone by one of our dear students, Josephine. And I will also screen the YouTube chat. So for everybody who's online and you're already on YouTube, you're already safe. You can put in your comments and ask your questions there. I will then screen and recite them for you. And for those who are with Facebook, if you want to comment, just go on our YouTube channel and please put your comments in there. I'm very happy to have you and have you heard in here too. So very much looking forward to it. Professor Pondi, the floor is yours. Okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is it? Okay. Thank you very much for this kind presentation. I'm very happy to be back at the Diplomatic Academy in Vienna. I must say that it's always a pleasure to be here. And before starting the lecture proper, and I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to all of you who have taken your time to be here and to listen to this particular conference on understanding the transformation of Africa in the 21st century and beyond. I would like to ask you to accept the warm greetings from two institutions. The first one is the ICT University, which is in Yaoundé. The president of that university has made sure that he asks me to say hello to all of you, and I would like to do that. The second person is the director of the International Relations Institute of Cameroon, His Excellency Daniel Urbain Ndongo, who has also asked me to say hello to you and extend a warm welcome. The Institute of International Relations is a partner of this academy because they will belong to the same group of association of schools of international relations and academy, which used to meet every other year here and I think at Georgetown University in the US. So having said that, I would like now to move to the subject, which is the general introduction will be done just by saying that, in fact, it's a topic that as many people talk about Africa, they know about Africa, but the perspective which they use is their own often. So it's a good idea to have several approaches to the same subject. And what we're going to do today is basically to give you what we feel when we are in Africa, because I live in Africa, I work in Africa, and I've been working on African studies for the last 39 years. So I think that we have something to say concerning that, just as anybody else has his way in saying what they think, because this is really the thrust of the international system. Now, we'll look at the demographic transformation of Africa, which is very great. There's been a lot of changes between 1960, when most African countries became independent, where we were 250 million, up to today, 2025, where we count 1,400,000,000 Africans. So what is the impact of that demographic change on the situation, on the perception and the possibilities that it opens to African people? The third aspect will be the evolving economic and financial trends, where we'll see how, economically speaking, the continent has been able to manage and the consequences of that. Fourthly, we'll deal with the changing educational, cultural, and technological landscape. Here, we'll really focus on how technology of today, the digital world, has included Africa in a very dramatic manner and has made Africans see the rest of the world in real time. And I think that particular aspect is not often taken into consideration, because you still have people who think that news then don't get to Africa, that maybe we are shielded from what is happening around the world. And I will try to show that that is not the case, and that whatever happens anywhere in the world, in real time, of course, we are informed, and we also follow whatever is going on around. The fifth discussion will be on the significant level of diversification of African trade relations, that between the year 2000 and the year 2024. There we will see that maybe it is here that the explanation of the changes, the mutations, the fluctuations, and the recomposition of African position in the world may be due to this particular aspect. And then finally, we'll get to how to evolve from mentorship to partnership. If we are in today's world, there are new things which has to be probably approached as far as relations with Africa are concerned. And it's difficult to remain on the old framework when the ground is shifting and shifting very quickly. It's important to be up to the changes that are occurring in front of us. And in concluding remarks, of course, I will be closing my talk. So let us start, and I already said why the choice of in fact, if I could have just a drink, I would show what I'm trying to say. Yes, if you could, just half of it, so that I will try to. This is not water from the Congo River yet, but maybe one day. Thank you. Okay, so this glass which we have here today, some of you, if I asked, how do you see it? Some in this room will say, the glass is half empty. And I think they will be right. Others will propose another answer by saying the glass is half full. And they too will be right. Because in fact, when you look at it, the half is at the same time half full and half empty. But the theoretical approach to this, the conceptual framework is different. If you say that the glass is half empty, it means that your theoretical approach is from the top down. Because where there is a gap is at the top. But if you say that the glass is half full, it's from the bottom up. Because it's from the bottom that you have resistance and also fluidity. So in fact, we're not describing different things. We're taking opposite hypotheses to describe the things, even if it is different, yet the hypotheses are opposite. So I suggested when we tend to see Africa, we tend to evaluate Africa, some come with the notion of the half-full bottle or glass, and others come with the idea of half empty. And I think that is where the beginning, the foundation, is different when we start to analyzing. What I propose is that we be open and that we look at things in a very, I would say, objective manner if possible. So the demographic transformation of Africa, I would like to suggest that in the year 1960, this was the year where 17 African countries joined the United Nations in 1 year, 1960, becoming one of the great groups of the United Nations. And later on, today we are 55 out of the 193 countries that are members of the United Nations. And you see in 2025 will be 1.5, 1 billion and 500 million. In 2050 will be 2 billion and a half. And in 2100 will be 4 billion. It's important to know, and it's important to anticipate, because the name of the game here is how to anticipate. This is both good news and bad news. Good news if we are able to transform the population, which is the age working population, which reaches 883 million this year, if we're able to transform them into engine of development and growth. How? By making sure that we address their way of thinking, we address their capacity to actually innovate and solve problems. So we see them as brain. But for now, most of us see them as stomachs and as problems. And that is what must change. How can we get from seeing them as stomachs, as mouths, to be fed, or rather as brains that will bring solutions? The more they are, the more solutions they will bring to solve our problems. I think it's a very important dilemma and a very important question which we must address at some point in time. The median age being 19 means that half of the population is above that age, and the other half is below that age, which makes for a very young population indeed. But as I said before, we should transform the young population as an engine of growth, as a source of innovation, bringing solutions, and so on and so forth. So I think it's important. Now, the per capita GNP of Africa in the 1970s was not very high, between US dollars. It has grown a little bit in the year 2000, but now we are on the range of 3,000, which is a lower middle income, or lower. Very few are above that. You have the Seychelles, 12,000, and you have Mauritius, which is around 11,000 as well. Libya, which used to be 12,000, is now, unfortunately, around 6,000 and 6,500, following what happened there. And we were told that things will go for the best, but we have to see. So the per capita GNP is one way of looking at things, of course. But another way of looking at things is also to see that the population lives more and more in urban areas, whereas before Africans were known for living in rural areas. In the 1960s, about 80% were living in rural areas. Today, in fact, it has become more and more urban. You have countries where you have more than 60% who live in urban areas. And we have the biggest cities now. You take a city like Cairo, 20 million. You take a city like Kinshasa, 15 million. And so on. So these are huge cities which also pose challenges for development. But when we look at the evolving economic trends, this particular chart is interesting. Why? Because it shows you the part that Africa detains in world production of many of the important minerals in the world. And you will see that those minerals are many, and they are strategic minerals as well. They help for the industry, they help for health, material, they help for automobile. So you can see that Africa detains, by and large, a lot of these on her soil. And what is interesting is the ranking in terms of production. And you see almost here everywhere except two places. For manganese, it's only number 2, and for aluminium, it's number 7. More importantly, perhaps, is the ranking in the reserves and the percentages of what is left in Africa. Because after almost 500 years of exploitation of those, for some reason, there are still the majority of these minerals still with us in Africa. You can see, for something like diamond is 80%, which is a lot, but coltan, particularly interesting. Coltan is really the name of the game today. Everything that we own, everything that we have, based on that, and of course the cell phones and all the digital industry is around that. And in one country, the DRC, you have the majority of those of that particular material. So it's interesting to see that all this is in Africa, but what is interesting today is that we should stop just giving the list of the different minerals, because the industry has changed. When you take a car, which costs, for instance, 10,000 euros, for instance, in fact, the price of the minerals which we are having here is less than 3,000. The rest is the process of manufacturing, of transformation, that gives it added value. So it's important for us to stop just thinking in terms of raw material, because what gives wealth, what gives added value is the process of transformation. And that is why it's important that process of transformation, we plead so that it takes place in Africa. Because then we'll have products what we'll be selling at higher prices, one. Two, we'll be creating jobs in Africa, which is a good thing for immigration, because believe me or not, most Africans do not want to leave, but many are forced to leave because they think that there's no other alternative but to go. But if you ask them, many would prefer stay there. So it's enough for us to say that the price of commodities today is driven more and more by the capacity of exchange, of transforming the product and having it a more industrialized product. That's what gives it value added in terms of money and in terms of its use. So I think it's very important for us to understand that. Now, the changing educational, cultural, and technological landscape. It's important for us to understand that Africa is not a static place on Earth. It's important to understand that we can also adapt to the changing environment in order to be in conformity with our own needs. For instance, when you take internet penetration or usage, you will see that the way internet is used in Africa is not exactly the same as here. Here you have the computers, you have the laptops and so on. In fact, the majority of the Africans, what they use is their telephone. It is their telephone that serves them in order to do buyings, to go to the shops, when they go to the farms, when they order farm products, when they order how do you call the thing you put in order to multiply the production and so on. All these, they use their cell phones. So the cell phone, which is available everywhere, is also available not only to make phone calls, but in fact to use the more practical aspect of it, which in Europe or in the Northern Hemisphere is not exactly the use of the cell phones. When you go today to a place like Kenya, Nairobi, or Mombasa, in fact, you pay your taxi directly with M-Pesa. You don't pay your taxi with money. So they've gone a way ahead of what obtains in many places. Everything absolutely can be gotten with the digital money. Why? Because it's safer. That way, if you are attacked, there will be nothing to be taken away from you, because you don't carry currency with you. So that is one aspect. But the habit has been already installed to really make sure that that means of payment has multiplied. It's everywhere. So it also means that whatever happens around the world is well known. Because the way the Africans get their information is no longer, and that is a major development, is no longer through the big state corporations which used to inform and even flood Africa, like the BBC, like VOA. And so you know that these people are functionaries of the foreign ministry. They are diplomats because they are paid by the foreign ministry, not information ministry of their countries. So today, less and less Africans are listening to these news coming from there. In fact, most Africans rely on alternative means of information, which is closer to people who have lived things and who relay them through tweets or through TikToks or whatever. And that information is really proximity information, rather than what is the institutional information. And I can tell you that not many people listen to that anymore. So that leaves way for comments, because people tend to be sharing information as also. The minute something important happens, it is shared within the next 5 to 10 minutes. So the multiplication of information is very quick in Africa. One of the things that happened in Africa is that fixed phones were not very much popular. And in fact, that handicap turned into something good for us. Because we didn't have infrastructure for fixed phone, it was very easy to evolve with mobile phones, very easy. Because that mobile phone technology met the African everywhere, wherever he was. So I think that in terms of the level of information, we should retain that the Africans are extremely well informed. And today, we have other things. We have regional news, which are in our own languages. So if you don't understand French or English, you will see that in Swahili, there's a whole desk of information in Swahili, where 300 million people speak Swahili, for instance. So it goes across Uganda, Tanzania, Kenya, for instance, or Bambara, or Hausa, and so on. So these are trans-African languages, and many of the Africans today are using those trans-African languages, which are spoken by hundreds of millions of Africans. So I think it's important to have that in mind, because when we have said that, we move now to an aspect which, to me, is very crucial. And that is the diversification of African trade relations between 2000 and 2024. Here is, in my view, one of the keys of understanding how Africa has been transformed or has transformed itself. In the 1960s and 1970s, most African countries were locked up in a bilateral relation with their former colonial country or former colonial administration. They did not have the choice of whether or not to accept a proposal. It was either you take it as it is, or else you will remain without anything. But between the 1970s and today, what we see is that there's been a multiplication of partners who do not come with the idea that the proposal is either you take it or else. We see here that the European Union still presents itself as the number one partner. It may be partially true, because with 280 billion euros, we are now in 2024. When you add simply the three that come down there, the three simply, meaning India, 103 billion US dollars, China, 267 US dollars billion, and Brazil, 265 billion. If you take these three, you can see that the weight of the trade with the European Union does not really match up quite. And I also said that with the European Union is a very old and historical undertones, that relation with many of the African countries anyway. So what we see today is a high diversification of the trade relations, which go to the transformation of Africa itself in terms of its own infrastructures. If you go to Africa today, you will see that the number of kilometers of highways, of railways, of airports, of bridges, of hospitals, and sports arenas, it's tremendous. And many people don't realize that that is due precisely to the capacity of the Africans, henceforth, to be able to negotiate, to be able to trade, and to be able to tell what it is that they want. And even, sometimes, to blackmail some in order to get other things. So I think it's interesting to see that that possibility exists. And the partners of Africa tend to provide different things to the continent. When you take India, for instance, India has a lot dealt with the ICT domain. That's what they do, and telemedicine in particular, pharmaceuticals and telemedicine. They do that. China is all-encompassing, basically, with a lot in the domain of infrastructure building, which is quite striking, I would say. Brazil has started something very interesting, is to teach the Brazilians their African origin, which before was not the order of the day. It's President Lula who actually brought that. And today you have 500 firms of Brazilian origin and nationality that are in Africa as a result of this bridge open between Brazil, which is next to, not far from Senegal really, and the rest. Russia, of course, agriculture, health, and the military personnel, which people are really obsessed with that, but we'll come back maybe when we talk on a more larger scale concerning these aspects. Japan has a long relations with Africa, with the TICAD in particular, and a very memorable fact is that Japan has made a donation to Africa in 2022, of 30 billion US dollars. But it will be done given in three installments. What is strange is that African countries have accepted that. At the same time, they have contested and protested when other partners have proposed to give aid money, saying that this is no longer the time for aid money. But for Japan, they accepted. So what is the significance of that? Is it that it means that it's not only an economic gesture, it's also a political, maybe, and it's also a philosophical gesture. Okay, the United States doesn't have really much, 71 billion with Africa is very negligible, and I think it's likely to go down as we see things, basically. And on top of this, you have the BRICS New Development Bank, which has pledged to give yearly between 70 and 100 billion US dollar in order to build infrastructure in Africa. When we finish the presentation, you will see why I insist on infrastructure. Because a united Africa, an integrated Africa, is the best option for us to stand in today's world. We cannot, as Africans, afford to be fragmented, segmented, in a world which is becoming more and more mobilized as a group. It's very important for us to understand that. So, what transpires from this particular chart here is that the diplomatic imprint of Africa has more than quadrupled. In other words, where before the Africans were confined to the former colonial type relationships, today they have been freed from that. Because the people and the countries and the structures that are dealing with Africa have no reference to the colonial past. In fact, that is even one of the reasons why they succeed, is because they don't make any allusion to that. And the way forward is precisely without any kind of colonial approach. Many people have criticized China and Russia and Turkey recently, but what the Africans say from their perspective is that none of these countries has had a colony in Africa. And I think it is not just a historical aspect. It is to say that there is a time for everything. We must turn the page and start seeing the Africans not in a way of giving advice, not in a way of knowing better, but in a way of real listening. It is one thing to hear. It is another to listen. And we have the feeling as Africans that we are being heard but not listened. It's very important to bring that difference, because hearing is something and listening is another. We are being heard but not being understood. That is also another aspect. Because it's important to see things in the way and in the shoes of the person who is expressing them. And the feeling that many Africans have is that there are pre-arranged packages which do not take into consideration the real needs of the Africans. And that is why some other offers have prevailed in terms of choice. Because many Africans had the feeling that this choice will solve this specific problem. After 65 years, many Africans have started having doubts on the ability, for instance, of the peace missions to actually accomplish their duty. Because the reason why they were there is to bring peace, and in fact, disorder, trouble, and chaos went up. So the question was asked, what is finally the reason for their being here? And another aspect, which is important when analyzing the Africa of today. We have the means to know what's going on, of course, as I said. We were told that we should be wary of certain countries, for instance, China. But at the same time, we also were facing some newscasts showing certain things. For instance, there was an explosion that occurred in the Chinese seaport of Tianjin in the night of the 12th and 13th of August 2015. And it's a tragic event, all the more tragic that 50 people lost their lives. And anytime human beings die, it is a matter of serious sorrow. And 700 others were injured. So it was a very serious matter. I repeat, it was August 2015. But what the Africans discovered, and I think it's important for you to know that, is that it led, that explosion led to a destruction of 10,000 cars belonging to Renault and to Volkswagen, destined for the Chinese consumer market. So it means that relationships are very well going, at least certainly until that time. And more than that, at the same port, it's a seaport, there was an assembly line for Airbus 320, which is big aircraft, of course, which was not directly hit, fortunately, but only had a few vibrations that attained it. So why do I say this? Because when you listen to those who talk to the Africans, don't engage in trade with the Chinese because they're exploiting you, because they will take advantage of you, because what we answer is very simple. As much as you have the right to conduct the trade relationships that you decide to conduct, you should also accept that the similar right is attached to us. And we have the right to trade with whoever we think, as long as we believe that at the end, we get something which is of interest and of importance to us. In other words, many Africans do not like the patronizing manner to say, don't do this, do rather this, as if Africans were children, what is called the infantilization of a continent. And I think that that kind of attitude is not conducive to serene cooperation, to level-headed discussion. It's important to understand that everyone has a sense of what is good for him or for her, and that we'll work for that to happen. We may be wrong, we may make mistakes, but it is our mistakes, and we should assume and pay the price for those mistakes. But so, there's a lot of confusion and uneasiness in Africa today, because we have a feeling that you think that we don't take into consideration 300 years of suffering, and that we don't factor that in our discussions. Yes, we do. We do. And people say you're leaving a situation of constraint to get into another situation of constraint. I can tell you that no. So we will talk about that as we close this discussion. But it's important. But it's important to make sure that what is happening in Africa is also apprehended in a very cold-blooded manner. Not everything is okay, of course, in Africa. The people who will carry the change on the continent are the young people. And they are the youngest population on earth whom you find in Africa. And I told you in the beginning that it could be either an engine of change or a very dangerous obstacle to growth. Now, we see that 25% of the youth now, as we speak, at the age of 15 and 24, find themselves out of the educational system and not involved in any kind of employment or pre-employment scheme. This is a UNESCO report, 2024. This situation is preoccupying. Why are they in that situation? It's because usually in the rural areas, many prefer to go to the field at the time when the class time has arrived, because they go to the field or they go to look for the cows and so on, or they go fishing. So it's important to make sure that that way of doing is reprimanded, and the parents do let the children go to school at the right moment. The second aspect is the persistence of a gender disparity or gender gap in the STEM. STEM is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. It's important that women or female students be admitted there more than they are now. Only 30% of students enrolled in the STEM fields are female, and it's not good. It's not good because, in fact, women are, in a country like Cameroon, they are 52% of the population. So even from a democratic standpoint, they are more than men. And from an educational standpoint, you know that if you educate a woman, you educate the whole family and the whole community. I'm not certain that it's the same thing with a man. Maybe you brew more trouble sometimes when you do that. Maybe this doesn't agree with what I just said. I don't know why he does that. Yours is okay?
Mine is okay, but
how to bring it over?
the IT expert just exited the room with a very strong view, so I think she knows exactly where to go. She didn't seem like leaving in panic, so here we go. So we should be fine within a second.
Sorry. That's okay.
Takes a while, sorry.
We'll wait. It's reprogramming it.
Still loading. Just have to go full screen.
Yes, okay.
Full screen is somewhere.
That's okay.
Need something else?
That's fine. Thank you very much. Now that I was talking about science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So I got what I wanted, all of it. Okay, so I was saying that it's a problem because there should be more women. And in my experience, when women are given the leeway, the possibility to do something, I've been for many, many decades a person in charge of universities. And I can tell you that today, in Cameroon, for instance, the first 5 who are ranked, be it at School of Medicine, School of Engineering, at any school, at the Faculty of Science, women or young women are always on top, always. So which means that they should be given the possibility to express themselves. And maybe that's why some men are a bit crossed by that, but it's true that the excellence often seems to be on their side. And as I said before, society would be better regulated if they were able to get better wages, better work conditions, and possibility to blossom professionally. It's very important. Now, 15% of African students are enrolled in job providing sectors of technical and vocational education. It's not enough. Because today, what we should be putting more emphasis on is precisely technical and vocational education and training. Because it is with that that you can transform your environment. It is with that that you can master let's say the different aspects of practical technicalities. Now, what we propose really is that whenever there is an agreement to have a long-term technological project, such as the pipeline, for instance, there should be a school that goes with it in order to train at the same time as the time warrants the people who will be working on it. So it should start maybe 2 or 3 years before, where you train the locals. And since you have long pipelines that go, for instance, from Chad to Cameroon, is about 2,000 kilometers, then you will have people who will be working there along those, and that will provide local jobs for a long stretch of industrial work. So I think it's important to do that. When we also do undersea perforations, you should have people who are expert in that. We should no longer continue to wait for that package to come from abroad. We should also internalize that kind of scheme, so that at the end of it, the maintenance will be locally provided. It's very important. And I think that this is what you find in Asian countries. They insist that when you bring the good which you are bringing, that the engineers should be around so that they take over. And it's a good thing. That will create jobs. What we want for jobs to be created in Africa, more jobs. So it's not a bad thing at all. Now, African countries invest very, very little in research and development. It's obvious. If you take the research and development statistics, they are appalling. I think there's no other word to describe them. They are simply appalling. Far less than 1% is a mere 0.6%, which of course is difficult to understand. But when you take the same statistics, you say a place like Latin America, they are around 12%, which is a lot. So we need to understand that you must have fundamental research, you must have applied research, and applied research is precisely what helps you to solve your problems and not to depend on others to do it. We cannot reach that goal if we don't triple, quadruple the research budget of our research centers, and even beyond that, even in schools, because research is a state of mind. You start in secondary schools and you continue. We have the bad habit to believe that those who are in technical education are less clever, less intelligent than those who are in long-term general education, where they study philosophy, they study geopolitics like us, and so on. We are not more intelligent than the other, but they can change things. They can, in fact, transform nature. We cannot. And today what we need it's a blend, of course, but what we need more today are people who are in a position to actually challenge the environment, change it, and accommodate it. So it's very important for us to see to this. Now, how to evolve from mentorship, which has been so far the name of a game, to genuine partnership. It's not just a play on words. It's a very serious transformation which is being required here. When you are a mentor, you dictate, you impose, you give orders, and you give ultimatums. When you are a partner, you listen, you understand, and you try to have a mutually consensual relationship. It's extremely important to understand the state of mind of the two people who are at the center of our description here. So, in which way? When we take important projects for Africa, it's important to ask the Africans, what are your views on your important projects? Important projects cannot be the ones decided by the World Bank or the IMF. It cannot be. It has to be decided not even by people who live in these urban centers. We should no longer continue to consider people who are village dwellers who live in the rural areas as second-class and second-hand citizens. They are not. And it's not because they don't speak either French, English, German, or Spanish, or Portuguese, that they are second-class citizens. No. In fact, you have in them a wealth of knowledge and of expertise. We should take them as the expert they are, because they've been working with the soil for hundreds and hundreds of years. And they may have solutions which may elude you clearly. So I think we should have partnership with them as well, taking them as those who are the custodians of endogenous African knowledge, which has been on for thousands and thousands of years. So we should not come on a high resolution stance and think that we know better than them what is good for them. And I think that attitude has been reproached to many of our partners, of our mentors, and also to the Africans themselves when they deal with people whom they call from the backside or from the backward areas. No, there's no such backward areas. So among the aspects which may be of interest, really, I've selected investment which, in my view, could help Africans. The first such investment today is a Trans-African Highway. Because the Trans-African Highway is the key to accelerating the integration of Africa physically. And it is 60,000 kilometers when you take all aspects of that Trans-African Highway. 60,000 kilometers. It's huge. It's extremely, extremely important. Cairo to the Cape, 8,000 kilometers. When you are able to achieve that, you are able to unleash a huge amount of energy in terms of trading, but also in terms of helping the Africans know Africa, discover Africa, and do business within the African continent itself. And I think it's very, very important. The Trans-African Highway is a massive network of roads, okay? And the only one that has been able to be achieved so far is the Dakar, Senegal, N'Djamena, Chad, 4,500 kilometers. That's the only one. But the others are still not able to be conducted because of insecurity. And in fact, if they are there, they will help the security aspect because there will be security spots on them. And why not also think about having railways not far? Because in terms of security, when the railways are not far from the highways, it makes things easier for the people who are in charge of the security. The other aspect where good investment could be taken is the Great Green Wall. What is that? It is an ambitious project to combat desertification and promote sustainable development in the African Sahel region. In fact, it aims at restoring 100 million hectares of degraded land, 100 million. That will create 10 million jobs. It spans across 11 countries, 11, of the Sahel region and beyond, including Burkina Faso, Chad, Djibouti, Mali, Niger, Senegal, Ethiopia, Sudan. And it's a very interesting because it has to restore vegetation and at the same time creating jobs and creating know-how, scientific know-how. I think such programs are people-oriented. They will help to change the quality of life of the Africans on the ground. And people will see the exact return on investment as the programs evolves. And I think that's the kind of programs that we are really fond of. And then the last one which I have selected has to do, I don't know what, the consolidation of the African continental free trade. The African continental free trade is the largest free trade area in the world today, with consumption patterns, consumers of 1.4 billion. It is extremely important that it should serve as a launching pad for Africa. It's very important indeed. The hope is that it will increase intra-African trade by 52% by the year 2035. So it's the reason why intra-African trade doesn't increase is very simple, because we produce the same things. Because the market of Africa was not oriented towards an African consumer. It was oriented towards an extra-African consumer. So most of the goods were drawn, taken either to the port or to the airport, and left Africa. And that's why should I buy Ghanaian coffee? Why should a Ghanaian buy Cameroonian coffee? Doesn't make sense. So that's why most of the time we cannot trade among ourselves, because we sell the same things for foreign markets. Now, the idea is for the African free trade area to serve the consumer in Africa, so that he can, in fact, help himself and have prices that are affordable. So these are some of the investment which partners and not mentors could actually select, because they will have a great rate of return on the well-being of the Africans as such. It will be of great interest, of course, for Africa's partners to strive to understand the multi-layered nature of the transformation. I've tried to show that it doesn't come from one aspect. It comes from many, many different angles. You have the school, you have the curriculum, which has to be changed. You have the attitude of Africans toward himself. You have the attitude of the African towards other partners. You have the attitude of the partners towards Africa. All this is multidimensional, and it has to be taken into consideration as we look at the way Africa is changing, Africa is evolving. So, as I said, it will be of great interest for Africa's partners to strive to understand the multi-layered nature of the transformation now taking place on the African continent, and search for converging, mutually satisfying ways to find consensual solutions in the spirit of the African philosophy of Ujamaa, practiced today in Tanzania, and which puts forth the principles of collective ownership, social equality, and continental self-reliance. I want to thank you very much for your kind attention, and thank you for listening to me until the end, despite the interruptions. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Pondi. Thank you especially for your evaluations of these critical factors that shape the current situation, as well as the prospects for African development in the 21st century. You were not only picking up on, but critically assessing Western narratives on the current situation and the prospects for development of Africa, which is actually quite central. If we really need to have that picture recalibrated, only then we can come up with a true, a valid picture that allows us to reshape ideas and conduct policy reforms that are actually effective and can increase the economic prospects and living conditions of the Africans, which it is about, this partnership. So as like a summing up what I heard, it's African agency and sovereignty in decision-making that should be a precondition for any partnership. That's a critical point that one cannot stop to repeat again and again. It seems obvious, it seems logical. The more surprising it is, how hard it is to establish in this system that we are conducting politics and economics as they are. So I have a bunch of questions, but I know it would be fair to give the voices to the audience. So I invite you to bring forward your questions, your comments, yeah, I'm happy and looking forward to any discussion. So please, first question from the audience in presence.
Yes, thank you for your wonderful summation and discussion here today. You emphasized, and I think everybody agrees, that infrastructure, free trade, transportation, and all those aspects are critically important. My question is, what are the barriers, the major barriers preventing these decisions? I mean, I'm sure there's foreign investment to come in and help with this process, but obviously there's trepidation to do that. But what are the barriers to get everybody on the same page? And can these problems be solved keeping with the huge population growth that is coming in the next decades?
Okay.
Would you like to collect some?
Yes, three.
Okay, we collect another two.
Hello, good afternoon.
Hello.
Professor Pondi.
Yes, hello.
Yeah, I have to say that with a lot of emotion, I have followed this presentation. I was not aware of till the afternoon when one of my classmates from Amsterdam sent me the link, and I live here. My name is Maimunata Ouattara, Ambassador of Burkina Faso to Austria here, and permanent representative to Vienna-based international organization. I am your very student.
Yes.
20 years ago.
I remember very
From
well.
International Relations Institute of Cameroon.
Yes, yes. We were very happy. You see, Eric is here through you.
Yes, thank you. Eric was also at the African Union Commission.
Yes.
Through me.
Yes, it's true.
Yes, yes, yes. So thank you very much. When you were mentioning 2004, Madam Katja, it was the year of my first encounter with Professor Pondi. And I see the same dynamism, the same honesty, and the same Pan-Africanist in him. Whatever he was saying, I was not surprised, and there were music to my ears because we have learned from him a lot. He's someone who is very trustful, and I was talking about integrity. I am country of Burkina Faso, is country of upright people.
Of course.
He has traveled there a lot, and I think Africa is on the rise. We have been on the rise, and the beauty of what you have said that I also can is that Africa is not static. We are moving. So hence the importance to also for our partners to change, to have a dynamic shift on how they deal with us. We are doing same, but you have said also, we have been heard, not listened to. It's true, and we are still continuing to work and to be listened, to build new trust. Because the trust that has been there was not a good trust. I will say it's even mistrust. It's time that we review the term of reference of our partnership. Hence the importance to move from that mentorship, patronization to partnership. And not to search to look for aid to Africa, but trade. We have the research, developed countries have the technology. We can partner together in a win-win partnership, okay? To come together for a better world. This is very important. This is the narrative I'm carrying with me, so we be on the same board and we understand, to have a better understanding among us. And the flagship program of Africa has been designed, African Agenda 2063, where we have all flagship programs. We have our priorities there. This is where we want to partner with the world. If we continue to work on the business as usual, I mean, there is partnership diversification that Professor Pondi, you have mentioned here. And what is many times told to Africa is it's a continent of risk. But there is no need for investment if there is no risk. While Europe, for example, is saying there is too much risk in Africa, Austria is saying the same. Others are coming there to partner with us. It's the high time that we transform the risk into opportunities. And we Africans are there for that. So for that, we need not to overlook the Africans themselves because they know what they want. They know how it works with them. Otherwise, we will be working, talking, with no impact. That's what I want to say, that there is a need to build trust and real trust. Thank you very much, Professor Pondi. I'm very proud of being your student.
Thank you.
And finding myself here in Austria and in my diplomacy work is thanks to you. Okay. The tree you have planted is now bearing
Yes,
fruits.
I can see that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm very happy. Very happy. It's very touching.
So, still, one more question we take.
Or
Please.
yes.
Yes, my name is Shola, one of your students, also from ATIA.
Yes.
Yeah, so with respect to the partnerships you mentioned, I said something about connecting Africa and maybe trying to bring partners in to do that. So I was just wondering, why will a partner want to come and try to connect Africa? Because if it's a partnership, it has to be something that mutually benefits them. So what exactly do you think will be the benefits, maybe the selling point Africa will give to them, that if you can connect us together, we'll be giving you this? Because for it to be a partnership, they must have some kind of benefits also from the relationship. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for your questions and comments. I would start with the why the infrastructures are not being constructed at the correct pace and what is the problem. To be very honest, infrastructures sometimes are made where they are not needed. And where they are not needed, they are there because for other reasons than the necessity for the customers to use it, sometimes. Another reason may be corruption. In other words, yes, the deal is passed and then is on a very dubious grounds that is done. And the people who do that sometimes are not punished to show an example. Why? Because they are the people who actually direct everything. The third reason is that we have a system where we don't encourage the notion of taking the lead to finish something. For instance, we trained in our training system, in our schools, we train people to see as normal as somebody else will come and do something for them, which is a catastrophe, of course. You need to, at the end of your school system, to be able to take initiative to do things from beginning till the end, not expecting a third person to come and help you finish it. So I think that these values should be more and more put into the young African who is 10 years old, that he can change the world, that he can change his environment, rather than waiting for somebody else to do it. So I think it's a combination of many things. But corruption is also one of the explanations, unfortunately. But in some countries, you don't have that anymore, I think. I think that if you go there, you see what has been done in only 12 months. It means that you can do them. If you have somebody who's willing to be what is called a leader by example. A leader by example, not a leader by rhetoric. And we have too many who are leaders by rhetoric, but not by example. I think yours was really a comment. I must say that when I see you, it fulfills us, because our dream and our raison d'être is really to see what we have seen today. And we are very happy. I'm not surprised, by the way, but I think that we need to understand that we, the professors, we have no other satisfaction than what we've seen today. So I wish you all the best, of course. Now, the last question had to do with you. Okay, I don't know whether I said that connection has to come from somebody. Maybe you misunderstood me. Is that not what I think? I think that we have in our ecosystems in Africa a lot of very young, clever people who are not supported, because the ones who are in charge of actually carrying them do not believe that they can carry the day. You see, and that is also another way of educating ourselves. We've seen so many young people with so many bright ideas. And what I always say is that you don't need to have 100 products. You don't need that. South Korea had basically Samsung. It went around the world. It was a world-class product. Nokia was, I think, Sweden. It went around the world. Norway or Sweden? Finland? Okay, Finland. But Nokia at this time is the one that, in fact, brought the digital revolution, because it was there at the right time, at the right moment, and it went around the world. So why don't we fight to have one global, worldwide product? Where is it? And it comes from the minds of the young, even the very young. So if we don't believe in that ourselves, there's no reason why others should. But I don't think that connectivity should be brought by somebody else. If that's what you heard, it is very far away from what I think. Yes.
I would say we go for another round of questions. If anybody would go first, please, Josephine. Second row.
Thanks for a very interesting presentation.
Thank you.
When I was very young, I worked for a man who was Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs named G. Williams. In 1961, he got in big trouble for saying Africa for the Africans. And he almost lost his job, but President Kennedy kept him on. You mentioned about China. I wanted to talk about China. And I'm curious to know if you think that China is helping Africa or hurting it. Do you think that China has a win-win attitude with Africa? Or is it exploiting Africa? And I'm curious to know about your opinion. Thank you very much.
Okay, you're welcome.
So do we have another question? Yes, please.
I think thank you for your presentation, first of all, very, very compelling. My question would be about climate, because obviously, globally, things are in a very dire situation, especially with people that subsist on fish from the ocean, and overfishing and fish migration because of water temperature, fresh water to water crops, of course, and then the increasing danger of desertification, even if the Great Green Wall can be built, because the Sahara is an unstoppable force of nature. So I think nature might have lots of spanners in the works, not only for Africa, but for the rest of us.
Okay.
Thanks very much.
Okay.
May I build my third
Sure.
question? I can't resist on the first commenter. The 21st century is actually marked by like a heavy geopolitical shift. We have rising powers who are challenging the Western-led, brackets US-led international order. And there's a rivalry. So we call it, or we confine ourselves to talking about US or China rivalry. We can make it a bit more multipolar, but there is a lot of dynamics going on. And we see that there are dynamics going on in a way of competition for resources and seeking new markets. And Africa has it, as you said before. So there are the resources. You own them. It's on your ground. The markets are on your side, the future markets. You have the people who will do the consuming. So what is needed, in your opinion, for this richness that you have and the prospect that you have, that you can work with it and increase your, your bargaining position on the international sphere, in the political arena, your production position in the global value chains, to benefit and get these benefits to Africa, and not on the ground, as you said, not on the top, not on any political elites, but put it down to have an increase in the economic prospects and living conditions for the Africans. What do you think is needed to go this road and not to end up in some kind of a scramble for Africa, or a place where proxy wars are held?
Okay, thank you very much. Is China helping Africa? China is helping China first. You see, Chinese are no angels. They are no philanthropists. And the Africans know that very well. The thing now is, what do we gain concretely from engaging in a relationship with China? That is the question. They say it's win-win. It may be win-win for them, not necessarily for us. The person who sees the win-win, it depends on his perspective, where he stands. But what we've seen with the Chinese, and I think it's important when we are in Europe, to explain really what is the matter. Because otherwise, when you are maybe in diplomatic circles, there are words that are difficult to pronounce. There are attitudes that you cannot have. But here you are also in an academic environment. So to be very honest, Africans are not so, I would say, stupid to leave a situation of constraint, as I was saying, to enter willingly and with open eyes into another situation of constraint. And I think to think that the Africans can do that is badly placed as a thought. Now, what the Africans see in Chinese is that before they became China of today, the Chinese were already sending teams in Africa in the late 70s. They were sending them. They were not rich. One. Two, for us, the Chinese have had no colonies in Africa. It's important. Three, the Chinese recognize willingly that their entrance into the United Nations is due to African push. Because otherwise, it was Taiwan. This was considered the Chinese representative, not the Popular Republic of China. It was a concerted diplomatic drive by the Africans that allowed them, they might have done it later maybe, but at that time, in 1971, it was the push by the Africans. So, if the Chinese come, why have they been accepted? It's very interesting. It's because they didn't say, before we bring aid to you, you must change your system, you must accept this law, you must readjust the other one, and once you have done it, we will see on our terms how to help you. They didn't do that. They came and said, what do you need? And what is very bad is that we never organize ourselves, really, to deal with them. We should have. But what you asked, they gave, but it's not free. It's not free. It has a cost. And sometimes even it has a heavy cost, because you have to pay it. And they know the African system of barter, the barter system. You construct a road, we give you gold. You construct a bridge, we give you, I don't know, cobalt, and so on. So that they understand, and we understand too. So it was a moment of coincidence. But people like Xu Hanlai, Prime Minister of China, he was at the 1955 Bandung Summit with Jawaharlal Nehru of India. So these are not new encounters whom we discover today as the narrative has it. No, They've been there, and I repeat, there are no angels and there are no philanthropists. So it is now up to us to see how we can draw the curtains towards us, strategize, and get the most out of that relationship. It's not the Chinese who should do it. It's us, the Africans. Now, the climate and desertification, I must say that that's also an area where many Africans feel very frustrated, because that situation of the warming of the earth is not caused by us, as you know very well, but it is paid for by us in terms of consequences. You know, if there's a place where we can talk about sustainable development as a philosophy of life, I'm sure that you've been to Africa, certainly, it's in Africa. The philosophy of life is imbued in the way we will live, because we consider every thing as being having some kind of spirit in our traditional way of doing. So even when you plow the soil, you have to talk, you have to ask permission. And when you cut a tree, it's a major disaster. It's usually the object of negotiations before you do that. I'm talking about former Africa, of course. Today, things have changed dramatically, and for the worse, I'm afraid. But I'm talking about an approach to nature. And as you know, the first Human Rights Charter, as I'm sure you're aware of this, of 1236, was a triple charter. It was a charter, the Mandingo Charter. It was a charter for humans, it was a charter for animals, it was a charter for nature's rights. So it was a triple charter, which already in 1236 was taking care of all this. So where we got today is a very, very preoccupying situation, of course. But I think that big summits may not be the real answer to that, I don't think. Because we see after the summits that engagements are not respected most of the time. So the question is, why spend more time in organizing the summit than taking that money to take it on the floor, on the ground? It's better. Because those summits themselves are a problem. They cost a lot. So I don't have an answer. I'm sure that you have a better answer than me. But I think that training of people and conscientization is also part of the game. Because people say we have to cut the trees because we don't have wood but we must find substitutes for this. It's absolutely imperative that we should find substitutes. But I don't have any other answer than, I'm sure you might have a better answer than me. What is needed to spark Africa's value in the world market? I think the first thing for Africa is to have a narrative that has something to do with Africa. Let me give you a striking example. The World Bank, this highly respected and venerated group, some of you may be working there, tell us that you are poor when you have $2 a day. You are very poor when you consume $1 a day. But please believe me, in my village, nobody has $2 or $1. Nobody. They simply have no money. And the majority of the Africans don't walk around with $2 a day. They don't have that. But they do live. How do they live? They live through the economic cultural system, which is the barter system. I have chicken, you have yams, we exchange. I have a goat, you have bananas, plantains, we exchange. This is how 90% of the Africans manage to live, or maybe 90 is too much, let's say 70%. But this is the reality of the social life in many African countries. But when you take the World Bank classification and specifications, it's true in Washington, D.C., it's true in Vienna, but I can tell you that in the vicinity of where we live, most people don't have cash with them. In fact, they don't need cash. They live by arranging the circumstances so that they have always done that. So now the question, I will answer your question. If we continue to say that you need $2, you will not solve a problem. Because the basis of our hypothesis is incorrect. You start with a false hypothesis that you need money in your pocket. Yet, the Africans don't consider the financial aspect to talk about wealth. For them, wealth is correlated to what? Social relations. That's wealth, including the chiefs. A true chief is a chief because he has an extended social network, not because he's rich. You may have chiefs who are very poor, but very well respected, and vice versa. So I'm talking about the ability to understand others from their point of view and from their own philosophies. It's very important. And not to think that something is universal because I think so. No. Universality should be tested in the wants of people according to their own circumstances, not because you have decided so. So, to me, we must also make sure that we understand what we want. For instance, and I say it for the first time here, the definition of development to me should be changed. The Africans should say, henceforth, is developed any country in which every citizen has access to water, access to electricity, access to food, access to medicine, and access to schooling. If you have those 5 things, I'm saying each citizen, I didn't see a group of citizens versus another. You can be considered that you live in a developed country as far as we are concerned. So I think if we change that definition, we start now doing things according to the results that we are looking for inside the society. And you see that we move from point A to point B, from point B to point C, because the fundamentals are already attained. But if we say you need foreign direct investment in order to prosper, you need aid and so on, you will never make it. Because these particular criteria or macroeconomic aggregates, you don't control them. Since you don't control them, you cannot attain them with certainty. You must design a system in which you are in control from the beginning until the end, then to be accountable for it. And I think that that is what we need to do today in Africa, to have our own way of saying, this is what we consider as a developed country in terms of African environment.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Pondi, for your insights.
Okay, you're welcome.
And opinions, and also for training students to become very successful. That's
especially.
And thanks to all people in the audience with your contributions and comments.
And also the ambassador of Sudan who's here. We must acknowledge him. Welcome, Your Excellency. Thank you, and thank you for all of you who have taken the time to come and listen to this, I think, maybe rather intriguing topic. Maybe. Yes.
Is your book in English?
It has 5 chapters in English, including the chapter on the Academy. Yes, yes. Thank you so much.
Good.